Hi, everybody. I am Dr. Sarah Daly. I'm an assistant professor of criminology, law, and society at St. Vincent College in Latrobe, Pennsylvania, outside of Pittsburgh. I want to start with a huge thanks to Dr. Butler and to Dr. Gannon for organizing such a massive, really much needed, important event. I'm really excited to participate and to learn along with everyone else and to just share a little bit of my work with everyone. So today I just wanted to give a little bit of information, a very brief overview about systemic racism and individual bias in schools and how that contributes to the school to prison pipeline, and perpetuates these racial disparities that we see in schools and school punishment. My interest comes from my time in New Jersey as a high school Spanish teacher and then as a school counselor, before I came to higher education. I want to start out by asking you to think about the dumbest thing that you ever saw someone get punished for in school, because we are going to be talking about rules and procedures, and I do know that schools are a little bit ridiculous sometimes. So keep that in mind when we think about legitimacy and procedural justice. So dumb punishments, right, or stupid infractions, and inconsistent applications of punishment lead to issues with the legitimacy of rules and of school authorities, like principals or teachers, or even the rules themselves if they're dumb rules, as well as procedural justice, meaning the way that these punishments are allotted or the way that the rules are enforced. So what we know is that schools with more lower income students generally perceive less fairness in how the rules are supported, and in turn likely less support from adults in school. So this affects the school climate because students then become disillusioned or frustrated. They feel less supported by adults in their school, and then they see the school as a place with fewer opportunities or feel fewer connections to them. So legitimacy and procedural justice really become an important part of how we understand students and their behavior. So broadly speaking, across the country, there was a shift, much like or in schools, there was a shift from rehabilitation to punishment, much like we saw across the United States. So this was particularly notable because we started seeing also a link between student behavior and academic performance. So schools started to find ways to push students out if they thought they might drag down their test scores. And this is usually a result of testing being related to funding, to federal and state funding, and school budgets. So when we think about punishment, we think about primarily now in school or out of school suspensions, or in really dire cases, expulsion. We saw zero tolerance policies for things like weapon carrying, even for bullying or drug use or drug sales. But the problem with this is that there's no educational value to this. There's no rehabilitative nature to these really punitive punishments other than retribution, where we want people to get what they deserve, and incapacitation in that disruptive students are removed from the school environment. What it's really doing, though, is we are exiling students from the school community. We're abandoning them, symbolically and literally. We're giving them a social stigma, and they simply become someone else's problem at that point. But most importantly, it severs bonds, these social bonds that are crucial, that could be critical in keeping students in school and helping them to be successful both in and out of school. So, the problem with this too is that this punishment system mirrors what we saw in criminal justice and juvenile justice systems across the country, because schools really are microcosms of the environment that they serve, or the communities that they serve. So we started to see these racial disparities popping up. The NAACP found that African American students are more likely to be suspended, expelled, and arrested for the same kind of conduct at school. So when you match up minority students and their white peers, African American and Black students are more likely to receive a harsher punishment. We have to do this two ways. We have to look at the potential causes for this that may be a result of implicit or explicit biases on the part of the administrators. They may perceive minority students as more adult-like, more dangerous, and more culpable for their actions. So studies over time have shown this repeatedly. But also in schools that are generally under-resourced, understaffed, They also have undertrained staff or have fewer resources to address these problems effectively. So the effects of this are dire, though, right? And I list them over here on the right, where I say that research has shown over and over again that the effects of suspension, even one suspension, increase the likelihood of really negative outcomes. Not saying that all students who are suspended experience all these things, but we see an increased probability of it happening. So when we suspend kids and we pull them out of school, we're taking them out of their academic classes. They're not learning or they're not learning effectively. So they're more likely to experience being held back a grade. They're more likely to drop out. And also, when we think about this, we're just giving them a lot of time on their hands when we suspend them or even expel them. So they're more likely to engage in juvenile delinquency and in criminal activity as an adult, and they're more likely to be incarcerated as an adult, hence this school to prison pipeline. The other things that we see in schools where this is kind of a student body problem or the students are perceived as misbehaving all the time is we see these hyper security measures in the prisonization of schools. And ironically, a lot of these efforts typically have to implement a lot of school security measures, or they lose certain federal funding or state funding. So this is a financial and behavioral and school-wide issue, but we can see now how this is in fact systemic. So I want to start out by saying that I have nothing but the utmost respect for educators. As a former teacher, as a counselor, I value teachers, I value the profession, but we have to be frank here in that they are the authority figures in a school, and they are the gatekeepers, and they often dictate a lot of what happens to students in schools. So part of the problem here is that they may lack skills in de-escalation tactics or kind of even crisis intervention. And they may not understand the effects of the school to prison pipeline. So they may be overworked and under-resourced and might not have the emotional bandwidth to deal with a student who's misbehaving and then send them to the principal's office rather than to address the problem right then and there. The problem with this is that then minor incidents become serious problems. So what could start as students just being obnoxious and yelling at each other without these de-escalation strategies could turn into a fist fight, which would then lead to a really serious punishment like an out-of-school suspension or calling the police for a fight, which then contributes again to the school to prison pipeline. So it's not hopeless, I promise. I know I just dumped a lot on everyone, but what we can do is ensure that pre-service teachers, meaning people who are in school to be teachers, and current staff get the training that they need to ensure that they can de-escalate a situation, to understand how to address these situations. The other thing that we can do is have discussions with educators about how to address their own biases and to address these situations. Instead of focusing so much on punishment, we can focus on rehabilitative models. There's a lot of promising research out there about restorative justice and how that can be used to address student misbehavior. Schools can go back and look at their discipline policies and also what the purpose of police in schools are and if that contributes to an increase in student misbehavior rather. And then lastly, we can just gather and use data, because we are social scientists, to create policies and programs that are equitable and fair. So I thank all of you for your time and for participating in this. I look forward to hopefully connecting with some of you. I wanted to provide my Twitter information, but anybody is more than welcome to contact me via email or social media. Thanks again.